Hi, Richard.
Hi, Karen.
How's it going?
Great, great. How are you?
Good, good. So we have a pretty important topic to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. It's a very important one.
So let's dive in then. So let's talk
Great.
about spousal support. And you mentioned that you see some issues that arise in the negotiations with this topic.
Definitely. And I think the main issue that comes up in most of my mediations happens earlier than that, happens earlier than the negotiation when
Mm,
like people are trying to decide if this is something they want to even approach,
mm,
right? Like when everything's still so raw and that they have, seemingly hundreds of different decisions to make at the early, it seems like too much. And like the people are more willing to sort of say, well, I don't even know if I want to bring that topic up, considering everything else we have to deal with.
mm.
And what I tell the potential recipient is that, like, well, how about we wait until we know, if you're eligible, like we can determine that later when when the support calculations are done and you can find out how much you could be eligible for. And then, like then that tends to at least kick it down the road a little bit
Mhm.
so that, like the new co-parents can work out some of those, like scheduling things, and they can work out some of the decision making difficulties or whatnot. And then, like it takes the pressure off. And I think that's so important. But when it comes to these,
Mhm.
like more stressful conversations, like about fairness and about contribution to the relationship, which is a big part of mediating. Spousal support and mediation is
Mhm.
talking about the meaning of what people contributed. And ultimately, if they can agree that there was a significant enough contribution, and and that there is some legal basis to make that spousal support, then like we can put a number on it. But really, without that meaning making conversation, it's very difficult to only do it without only do it with talking about legal entitlements.
Yeah, because we know with child support there is like a chart, right?
Yep.
But with spousal, it's not quite the same, correct?
Yeah, it's not automatic like
Hmm.
child support is. And I mean, there are different ranges. So I mean, like there's low range, there's medium and high, and those will vary depending on how like how long the support can be claimed for.
Hmm.
There are also different types. Like there's only one kind of child support. Like it's and it's the amount. There are Section 7 expenses, which are you know the things that are over and above
Hmm.
the table amount that we were just talking about. But with spousal support, it's there are two different types. There's compensatory and non-compensatory. So when people start figuring out like how complex it is, like it can seem a little bit overwhelming, but really it like my role as mediator at that point is giving the right legal information so that somebody can decide if their entitlement is strong enough. Like did they take time away from work? Did they lose income and potential advancement to ensure that their spouse got a promotion? Like if there's a direct correlation, like time frame and whatnot, where you sacrificed and your partner benefited, then you have a really strong claim for compensatory spousal support. And then there's just sort of the non-compensatory, which is pretty much anybody who's had a relationship that's significant, that's lasted for 3 or more years, can apply for non-compensatory support.
Is it generally 3 years, Richard?
Yeah,
Is that the
the,
norm?
the minimum. Yeah, the
Hmm.
minimum living together. And like living together, I can't get into too many of the different variables. So
Hmm.
like I don't think it's really appropriate for this format.
Hmm.
But really, the relationship has to be significant. You have to be involved with this person. It can't just be a roommate.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Gotcha.
if you have a child together, definitely that
Mm-hmm.
definitely opens it up. But it does. You don't necessarily need to have it. You don't need to have a child together. But
Mm-hmm.
that definitely
Mm-hmm.
increases the chances of being able to have a strong claim.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there any other like issues that you come up with spousal support in negotiation or in like while you're negotiating? Because you already talked about before, but is there
Sure.
any like tips or anything that you could say that what you see happen and how maybe some of our people might get a better idea of what they could do?
So, I'll share a couple of scenarios that came up for me.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also want to know is what your clients are saying about it. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, how they're about it really early in the stages, like
Mm-hmm.
before they even decide like whether or not they're going to go to a mediator or not. But the scenarios that come up for me um, are really about, you know, people who really do have a strong claim and they really don't think that their spouse is going to agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in that circumstance, we really want to make sure that that this person really understands all of the law and that they get, you know, like the proper legal advice, because signing away something like a right to spousal support, it's very, very difficult to, if not near impossible, to overturn that kind of decision. And, you know, depending on what your entitlement is, I mean, you know, like seeking a redress in the courts afterwards, I mean, it could cost you most of what you would get
Mm-hmm.
from overturning it. So really exploring those reasons why somebody doesn't want to seek support. You know, if they have a strong, if they have a good job now, if they're making good income, if they're starting to save for their future, and both couples are, both parts of the new co-parents or the separated spouses, they just want to be financially independent. They don't want to draw on each other. Then this is a really positive situation. But, you know, if somebody doesn't want to approach support because they feel like the other person's just going to say no, that it's going to destabilize the mediation, I mean, that's making sure people have difficult conversations. I mean, this is why you're hiring a mediator, is to have the decisions to make sure that you are protected. I mean, sure, your kids are going to get the child support that they need. You know, like there's no way to negotiate around it. But you are also going to need to prepare for your future and really just making sure that that you ask and that you have this conversation. It's just so important for your future.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the biggest I've seen with people is that one is the most uncomfortable conversation because, you know, child support is, you know, it's legal, right? It's supposed to be legal. But I have seen some hesitation with women, especially asking, you know, because they don't want to cause more upset in an already upsetting situation, right? So I've seen that as well. Yeah, it's a tricky topic, right? Because, you know, it's um, depending what type of relationship you're in the first place with marriage, right? If your marriage was challenging,
Mhm.
um, it can lead to even more challenges than when you're uh, in your negotiations, right? So I think we get uh, sometimes, like I've heard from women too, we get a little intimidated. So
Mhm.
that's where your role would come in to try to help them, if I'm
Provide
correct,
them with
right?
the
Yeah,
safety, yeah,
yeah.
like provide them with the safety that, you know, like that, you know, that there's going to be somebody to balance the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, you know, like we're, you know, like obviously there are circumstances where neutrality is very important, but when we're talking about situations where there is a risk to safety, then, you know, like we're not talking here, we're not talking about like bodily safety.
No, no,
We're talking
no.
about emotional,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's equally important for people to feel like they can make decisions and have conversations without duress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big part of where I would step in and, you know, empower
Mm-hmm.
balance, because,
Yeah.
you know, both parties, well, when one party they're living out the pattern of of their marriage within the mediation. And really, this conversation would be a huge turning point for them to be able to have difficult conversations for long-term down the road. So I would say that using that opportunity with your mediator to really make sure that now you start to make change, so that you approach those conversations in a way and build some, resilience, build some empowerment, like having somebody who's trained to do that, so that you can feel like you can do it later on, with the support of the mediator, right?
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Like it's vital, because there's so many unknowns when you're going through this process, that to make sure that that you have their back, that at least you can encourage them, right, to ask for what they think is right. So
it's right, but then it's for asking for what's right, but it's going to lead into how well you're going to feel over the long term. Because if you don't talk about it, and 3 or 4 years down the road, like your financial situation hasn't gotten any better, and when during the mediation you had the opportunity to get spousal support, then that's going to really play into a lot of the same things, a lot of the self-reinforcing beliefs that made life very difficult for you before the separation happened, and for a long term down the road. So then this is a key moment. I fully acknowledge how much is going on for people at this time, but being able to balance what your needs are in the present moment, but also kind of tippy-toe into how these things are going to play out down the road. It is an important thing, and really making sure that I'm doing it slowly enough and at pace with how people are making progress on their journey towards a signed separation agreement is really important. There was if we're talking about to just come back to your original question, if we're talking about specific issues that come up in it, often, especially with the payors, they can not like the idea, and maybe they agree that spousal support is okay. Will we have that meeting making conversation, or they don't dislike the idea of paying support, period. They just don't like not knowing where the money is going, right? The problem is
common.
Yeah. So what we can do, because it's not child support, we can be a little bit creative, and we can say, well, does the recipient want to retrain to do something else? Do they want to take a course that's going to lead to, a better job for them? Do they want to take a master's, or, maybe a master's is too much, but, is there something that they really wanted to do and they weren't able to do during the relationship because they were, only working part-time, and because they were taking care of the kids? This is a very meaningful contribution that can really change the dynamic between the former spouses.
I like that. That they kind of at least have some understanding where this money that they're paying is going to go to, because I know I've heard others say it's difficult to keep paying and not knowing where it's going. So, and I know that's come up with some other people I've talked to as well. So that's a really good, so they have some better understanding that they improve their life, which means they counting on spousal support forever, which is generally not done unless it's a rule of 65, correct?
Unless the rule of 65 applies, then yes.
Yeah. So I just want to ask if anyone has any questions for Richard about spousal support. If you do, just put them in the comment box. Otherwise, anything else you want to say, Richard, before we wrap it up?
Sure. I think that another way to deal with, this idea that it's going to be forever or not is come up with a lump sum amount.
Yeah.
Almost all of the spousal support negotiations that I've done have ended in a lump sum amount, because it's finite. This is when they've either had to sell a property, or so something. Then there is potentially a more available cash around with some relationships with different circumstances, but also that it doesn't have that reminder every month that I'm having to, give somebody give somebody money that I actually don't really want to give money to. So like it just rips the Band-Aid off. I think is what like what one lawyer told me. I'm seeing that somebody wants to know what the rule of 65 is. Okay, so it what it means is if the age of the recipient plus the length of the marriage is more than 65 at the time of separation, that means that support can be permanent.
Yeah.
So I mean, if like if there's a marriage of 20 years and for most of that 20 years the recipient was a was a homemaker and they're only just starting to get back into the workforce and all this kind of stuff, and the rule of 65 applies, then that support, whatever is determined at the time of separation, can be for the rest of their life.
We have another question. What if spousal support is refused by the payer?
So that is common, and that's actually the scenario that I wanted to talk about next. So it's very, very timely. So in mediation, like people have to decide, they have to agree on all of the topics. So it is possible that one of the parties doesn't want to talk about spousal support. Now, it is their right to do that. And, really, as a mediator, my job in that circumstance is to make sure that people are exploring what their best possible alternative to mediation is. Like, this is supposed to be an arena where we're talking in fairness about all of the issues that apply to both parties. So because spousal support is such an important topic to at least discuss, then really it depends on whether or not, like, how hard I would press for that conversation to happen would depend on what that entitlement was decided to be. Like, if it was a really strong entitlement, then I might have to suggest really strongly, like, well, what happens if you don't talk about this in the mediation? I mean, like, are you prepared to walk away without an agreement? Are you prepared to have to, negotiate through lawyers? All this kind of stuff. There are ways to motivate somebody to at least talk about it and to come up with a compromise and to really bring out those resistances. Like, what are they about? Like, does it just seem unfair? Like, is it a little bit more difficult to put words to? Do they really just don't think that the money is going to be used well? Like, I mean, that often comes up. So really giving the recipient a chance to talk about what they want to do with that support can also be a really good way to sort of bring out, like, an agreement and a compromised amount. Like, it can be something that's low enough so that the payer believes that, like, it's fair enough, and it can be high enough that, like, that both parties feel like the compensation is a fair amount. Now, there are some situations that do come up, and this is something that I learned about early on, where a potential recipient will tell me, I've already been told that, like, spousal support is not going to be paid, and so don't ask. And it's actually being introduced as a condition for agreeing to the mediation at all. Okay. So I've had this happen a couple of times, not always with spousal support, but sometimes with other things. And we do have to acknowledge the possibility that this is a coercive statement, and then, like, my job is to make sure that this person is actually, sure, they're agreeing to mediation, but can they actually speak reasonably and in good faith about things? We won't, like, as if this kind of statement doesn't change over time, and it can change throughout the process. So, like, I don't automatically say no, and you need to go to a lawyer to figure this out with them. But those kinds of more coercive statements have to come down. I need to work to make sure that the potential payer there, it also feels safe, that their interests are being taken care of, that they don't feel like they're going to be forced to do something that they don't want to do, because everything in mediation has to be agreed to by the parties. I only help them have a conversation about things that they probably would not be able to talk about, in some cases cannot talk about, without help. So that's how I would deal with that more extreme scenario.
So another question was, why would the payer ever agree to spousal support?
Why would they ever agree to it?
Agree to spousal support.
Well, there's some deep meaning there that I'm hearing. I'm also hearing the pain that comes across in that kind of statement. Like, why would they ever agree to support me for the long term? So I think that it is possible for people to come around to this kind of decision. There might be things that were not available during the relationship as a partner that could be handled. Like that the support can be offered in this more financial way where there isn't the emotional entanglements of a relationship. So I think disentangling some of those emotional ties, but also making the financial ties finite, that they know that it's going to end, that it's only going to be this much. I think that when those details are made visible, something that was just a blank statement, like I'm not going to do that, right, has a lot more to do with the sense of impending loss, or like the sense of just, this brings up all of my unresolved feelings from this relationship. That's what I hear. But really, when we get into the details, I think that some people really do change their mind when things start to be more visible. Like when the resolutions on certain individual issues start coming together, we get an opportunity to see possibilities that seem impossible at the beginning.
It's good. There's also, like, you could also, with spousal support, there's also a hybrid model, right, where you could give a lump sum and smaller payments. Is that correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it is.
Lots of options then that you can work around.
Just
like the three of you could work around, right? And
like
figure that out.
Just to take off the burden. I mean, that's always the thing. Like, I'm paying child support, and now I'm paying spouse support, and like the payer's going to want to know, well, what's my take-home income going to be every month if I have to pay both of these things, and that does get factored into what the entitlement actually ends up being, because they do need to be able to pay for all of the things that they need to pay for as well. So like sometimes the initial calculation is unfair, and we look into that net disposable income to make sure that they can take care of their responsibilities, and when like that it's not going to change. It's not going to change like child support. If their income gets better, like it's still going to be the same amount.
Yeah. It's a really important topic that I'm glad we touched on today. So do you want to tell everybody where they can get in touch with you?
Sure. Like they can reach me at richard@alignedchoices.com. That's my email address. They can reach me by phone, mostly in the mornings. If they have that really strong question, they don't need to book an appointment, then they can call me at 647-786-0352. And I think the link to the website is in the bio for IG. So,
all right, awesome. Well,
thank you.
Thanks, Richard, for joining Karen and me workshop for us, for having another great conversation, and we'll hopefully see you next month.
Okay. Thank you, Karen.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye for now.